Continuing with the calendar, on page 20, next category, House bills vetoed by the governor. Page 20, House bills vetoed by the governor. House Bill 259 is an act to prohibit the Board of Education from replacing the standards of learning with Common Core state standards without prior statutory approval. The bill originally passed the House January 27th. The governor's veto is before the body.
The gentleman from Loudoun, Mr. LaRocque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bill before us was very easy for us to come to agreement on when it was originally voted on, because it is a very, very simple bill. The question this bill addresses is, should we leave the decision of whether or not Virginia would follow 45 other states and opt into the Common Core, leaving that decision up to an unelected body of 9 people on the Virginia Board of Education. The decision to opt in would be a major shift in education policy, and it would be one which would carry significant costs to implement. It should be made by this legislature. The governor apparently is not a fan of Common Core. He referred to it as a step backwards, and I agree. The governor reminded us, and I quote the governor, in June of 2010, the Board of Education echoed this sentiment by unanimously adopting a statement in support of the standards of learning and voicing opposition to the Common Core state standards, end quote. Yes, the board in 2010 opposed Common Core, and that puts it to rest, right? Well, it actually does not. I'd like to point out that the current board is not the same board that made this resolution. There's one remaining member. Mr. Speaker, we have a saying around my house. I, being the head of the household, make all the important decisions. But my wife knows that she has the responsibility of deciding what's important. Mr. Speaker, the question we have before us is who gets to make this very important decision, a decision to opt into a major shift in education policy, one that could cost literally billions to implement. It seems pretty obvious the answer is that we should make that decision. I'll close by saying that if we fail to take ownership of this decision, an unelected board may make it for us. If there is no plan to adopt Common Core in Virginia, there should be no problem voting yes on this bill. Please vote yes on House Bill 259 and put this issue to rest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I rise to speak to the veto.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I understand what's happening here. You all don't like Common Core. We don't like Common Core. The governor doesn't like Common Core, and we have no plans to implement Common Core. It's not going to happen. So this bill does absolutely nothing, and that's the problem. The bill does nothing except say that for this one particular policy, we want the State Board of Education to come to us before they could possibly think about doing it. Nobody's thinking about doing it. The bill doesn't do anything. It's unnecessary. The governor doesn't think it's necessary. We don't think it's necessary. I would encourage the body to sustain the governor's veto. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Gentleman from Rockingham.
Mr. Speaker, I've been directed by the President of the Senate to inform the House delegates that in the execution of the joint order pursuant to House Joint Resolution 424, a nomination has been made by the Senate for certain judicial office as listed in the attached papers.
Thank you.
What did they do?
think LaRock might be an unelected figurehead of this House.
House will come to order. Gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the governor's veto.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House, I think we've lost the purpose of this legislation, and I want to redirect you to why we do need this legislation, and more importantly, why we need to override the governor's veto. It's very great that the governor agrees that Common Core is not good policy for Virginia, but Governor McAuliffe will not always be governor. And he will eventually leave office. And if we want to take a position of setting in the code why we think Common Core is not appropriate, and more importantly, not leave that responsibility or that authority to the Board of Education, we will override the governor's veto. We've done this before in the past, and more importantly, the Board of Education does a good job, but they do not set the education policy for the Commonwealth of Virginia. The General Assembly does that. And this is a policy matter. Whether you agree or don't agree whether Common Core is appropriate policy for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I would remind members, especially on this side of the aisle, that No Child Left Behind was a policy that we did not think was appropriate for Virginia, but was forced on Virginia by a Republican governor, a Republican president. And just as No Child Left Behind directed from the federal level what we should do from an education standpoint in Virginia, Common Core does the same. In a different manner, in a different way, but it's still having the federal government determine what the policy for public education would be in Virginia. So I hope you will vote yes to override the governor's veto, because it is our decision, and more importantly, should not be given and allowed to be given to the Board of Education alone to make that decision. It is our decision. So let's support overriding the governor's veto and make sure that Virginia's policy is one of not agreeing to Common Core.
Just to be clear, the gentleman from Loudoun, Mr. LaRock, wishes for the House to override the governor's veto. Shall the House override the governor's veto? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 64, noes 32. Yes, sir.
The bill.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Shenandoah.
you have not announced the vote yet. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So is the vote still open?
The vote is no.
Where, Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry?
Gentleman stated.
Where are we procedurally then if the vote has not been announced, but the chair says that the vote is closed?
I've closed the roll. I have not announced the vote. So that's where we are procedurally.
Further parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman stated.
If a member was not in his seat and wished to vote at this point, would it be possible to do that?
Yeah.
We can stand and vote if we want to. We can record it and adjust it.
All right.
Yeah, just destroy the roll and we'll take it over.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman Charles.
parliamentary inquiry.
Gentlemen, state it.
Has not the vote been taken and the roll closed and the vote is closed unless there's a proper motion to reconsider the vote before the body?
You haven't announced.
Pretty clear that the roll was closed and you were ready to announce the vote. I don't think there's any doubt the roll was closed.
I haven't announced the
Has not the roll been closed?
Yes. Been closed.
I'll announce it. The vote was 64-32. Failed. Yeah.
Continuing with the calendar, the next category, we have several conference reports
Speaker.
that have been submitted.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Yes, sir.
I don't think we heard, did the motion pass or fail?
It failed.
Okay, I thought it was 2/3 of those present.
It is.
2/3 of 99.
99
8, okay.
present.
99. How many members in your seats? How many 99 that answered the roll call?
Yes, who answered the roll call? No.
No.
Clerk will continue.